Today we're going to do some advanced UVW unwrapping in 3ds Max. The technique that we used before is fine for smaller buildings where we apply the texture in SketchUp and then unwrap it in 3ds Max. But if you have a larger building, or you have a building that has multiple faces that share the same texture, 3ds Max is going to try to unwrap that and fit that into a 1024 by 1024 pixel image. What's going to happen is as it fits more textures onto there, it's going to have to start shrinking those textures down. So you're going to lose a lot of that detail on the assets that you create. And when you import them into 3ds Max, they're just not going to have that clarity. And the end result, I don't feel that you're going to be very happy with. So we'll go through some of those techniques. It's not extremely difficult. It's just a little time consuming, a little more time consuming than if you were to just apply the textures in SketchUp and unwrap them in 3ds Max. So as an example file today, we created a lavu, or a lean-to. It's just a simple structure with some 2x4s, a corrugated metal roof, and a plywood backing. So we're going to have two main textures. We're going to have a wood texture for the 2x4s and plywood, and then we've created a corrugated roofing for that roof there. Relatively small structure. I think at its peak it's about 4 meters high and approximately 3.5 to 4 meters wide. So it's a smaller structure. We're just going to build it for a prop that you can throw into the backyard of a house somewhere. So we've already saved this as a SketchUp 8 file, and I've already gone into Photoshop and I've created two textures. One seamless wood texture, and then in Illustrator I created this texture here that's going to represent our corrugated roofing. So let's go ahead and open that model up in 3ds Max. So once the model's open, it's the same steps as previous tutorials. We're going to move that pivot point, and we are going to create a UVW unwrap modifier. The key difference here is we're not changing the map channel since we don't have any textures already applied to this. So we just want to open the UVW editor, go to mapping, flatten mapping, close that window, and then we go to render the texture. And then in this case, since it's a smaller structure, we don't need to do a 1024 by 1024. We'll do a 512 by 512 just to keep this file size down. And now we've created our diffuse map. You can see that it's all white or shades of gray. That's fine. We're not going to be using this particular map. We're going to overwrite this file in Photoshop with the texture file that we've created. So we'll go ahead and close these two windows, jump over to Photoshop, and we'll save this file as lavu_d.png. Now we've overwritten the PNG file, so we can open the UV editor back up. And now instead of a checkerboard pattern, we want to put the actual texture file in here. So we select this drop down in the upper right hand corner, pick texture, select bitmap, click OK, navigate to where we saved the texture file, click open, and now you can see our texture file is appearing on that perspective view there. So now each one of these faces are inheriting the background from this texture file. So what we can go ahead and do is start selecting the uprights for all of our 2x4s here for this structure. So we'll select the faces of them. You can just control click to select multiple faces, then we'll spin the object and select the back faces. Now all of our faces are selected. So in this, if we begin to try to move these out, you'll see some objects like this top one right here. There's still some points that we don't have selected, and that's just because of the funny geometry that SketchUp has made. So we want to actually select the entire face. So I'm going to Control Z, zoom in, and then Control click on that face there. And now none of our faces are being tied down here. Alternatively, rather than selecting out in the perspective view in 3ds Max, you can select directly in the UVW editor here. But the first thing that you're going to want to do is turn on the select by element UV toggle. So that's this icon down here. If we don't have that selected and I grab a face here, it's only going to grab that one polygon, and if I try to move it around, you can see that there's still some vertices that are locked down. But if I have this option selected and then I grab just one polygon, it's going to grab the entire element. So you want to just make sure if you're going to be working out of the UVW editor, you just want to make sure that's turned on, and that way you're going to select the entire element as you're going through and selecting them, especially if you have some funny geometry going on. So with all the faces selected for the 2x4s out here, I'm just going to start organizing them. And we don't want to resize them yet. We just want to get everything lined up here. And you don't have to be precise with these, because there aren't going to be any seams on these textures, so I'm just trying to get them lined up just to keep them organized. So those are all the faces of our vertical or upright 2x4s. And our texture file, if you can see here, is oriented in this direction. The grain is running top to bottom rather than left to right. So if I were to drag this out this way, deselect that, you can see the grain is running the wrong direction here. So what we'll want to do is just select all of those objects, and you can either go from the center handle here to rotate, or you can click the rotate tool up in the upper left. As you're rotating, you can see it's a free rotate, so we can rotate it into any degree. I want to lock that in, so I'll just hit the control key while I'm rotating, and it'll lock it into 5-degree increments. So we want to go 90 degrees with that, and just set it right there. Now you can see all the grain is running this way. It's zoomed in considerably since these are quite small, but we'll worry about resizing it when we've selected all of the faces and have everything oriented in the right direction. So right now I'm going to grab the edges and do the same thing. And that takes care of all of our uprights. So now we're going to take the horizontal 2x4s on the front and back and perform the same action. Now after that's done, we'll just grab these ends here and align all of those. And now we have these last two remaining 2x4s that are running up on an angle. So we'll select those faces. You can see now we have the wood grain running up at an angle. And we'll finish that off by selecting these bottom edges and doing the same thing. Now I'll grab all of these remaining edges just to kind of clean it up. Alright, and that takes care of all of the 2x4s. Now we want to get the front face and the back face for our plywood here. So So we'll grab those two faces. Drag them off and align them up. Now before we go any further, we'll keep it off to the side there. We want to increase the size out in our UVW editor of all of the 2x4s so that they just pick up some more detail on our texture file here. So we can grab each one now and just lay them over the top of one another. And then we'll, by holding the control key, just expand the size. Just get it as large as we can while still grabbing that texture. And you can see more of that detail then is being pulled onto the object. That looks pretty good right there. And now we can select the front and back of our plywood and do the same thing. We'll drop it in here. You can see it's lower quality texture. I want to shrink up that texture on that face there. So we'll select it, hitting Control, drag it out. And I think that actually looks pretty good right there. And from here, if you wanted to just move the textures around, you could just move those objects and apply some new texture, but that looks pretty good right there. Let's grab these faces. Now we'll move over to the face and bottom of our roof. Drag it out, align them up. And we'll just drop it down there. Now we want to make sure that the texture matches somewhat to real world, so we're going to grab these, just increase the size a little bit until we're happy with the way that looks. I think that looks pretty good right there. Again, we'll just line it up. I'm just looking at the edges here. Just see where it lines up well, and I think that's pretty good right there. You'll see we still have a couple of elements that are sitting out in our UVW editor. These might just be hidden elements that, might be the top of this 2x4 that you're never going to see. But you can click through on each one. So you can choose to move those around if you'd like and put them on the appropriate textures. But since they all seem to be in visible textures, or textures that you're just never going to see, you don't necessarily need to worry about that, but we'll move it around just so they're on the appropriate materials. So now we have the textures applied to our lavu here, and we have all of the wood textures on, we have the corrugated roofing on. So we're going to save this file as we had in the past. We'll change our map channel to 1. Move. Go to Utilities, More, UVW Remove, Remove Materials, and we'll export our lavu here. Alright, and with that exported, we'll jump back to Photoshop and we'll create our specular maps. There are going to be no illumination maps for this since there's no lighting. So we'll just adjust these colors as we had in previous tutorials and create our specular map. With those files created, now we can bring them into our import folder. And I've just created a shortcut on my desktop. and we'll take these 3 files and copy them over. Now we jump into City Skylines. The City Skylines open, we go into Editors, Asset Editor New, and select any of the themes. And we'll click on Parks, Plazas, and Wildlife. Now you want to pick a prop that approximates the size of the item that you had created. And I found for something this size, the Sandbox 2 is about a good size for our prop, so we click that and click Continue. Click our object, set the scale to 100, click Continue, zoom in, and there is our prop that we've created. And one thing I do want to go over, in addition to creating the custom UVW map, you'll notice that our roofing is just a flat roof, although there should be some grooves in there. With our specularity setup the way it is, it's just giving just one constant sheen. It almost looks like a mirror there. So what we're going to want to do is create a bump map that can imitate those grooves. Now, a bump map isn't going to change the geometry of your object. It's just going to tell the system where your peaks and valleys are on any object. So you can create a bump map for stucco texture, wood texture, anything you want, and it's just going to tell the system where highlights should be, where lowlights should be, and give a little depth to your object. So we're going to jump back into Photoshop and create a bump map for this. And back in Photoshop, we can create our bump map. In City Skylines, it uses normal mapping as opposed to just standard bump mapping. Bump mapping is a grayscale representation of depth. Normal mapping provides some additional information. It's a relatively newer type of bump mapping that is performed, and that's what City Skylines uses, so that's what we're going to do here. First, we want to, the only area that we're going to apply bump map to is the corrugated roofing. So we're going to duplicate this layer by clicking the layer and dragging it onto the new icon. Double click that and call it normal map. Then what I want to do is just control click the thumbnail so our corrugated roofing is selected, and then control shift I to select everything that isn't the roofing. And I'm just going to fill it with our background color, the black color. And Control D to deselect. So now our entire layer is filled up, and we want to create our normal map off of this. So we go to Filter, 3D, Generate Normal Map. Right now we're projecting onto a sphere, which is fine, but we want to change that to a cube just so we can see the detail a little bit better. Our navigation options are along the top. You can orbit, rotate, pan, and zoom in and out with the camera. So we can zoom in a little bit, move that camera around. And you can go with the default standard settings, or you can start making some minor adjustments. We're just going to adjust that blur just a little bit. And just play around with these until you get a look that you like. I think that looks pretty good right there, so we're just going to click OK to commit that. And now we've created our normal map. So we're going to go ahead and save this. We go File, Save As. We're going to save it as a PNG. And _D is our diffuse map. _S is our specular map. _I is our illumination map. _N is our normal bump map. So we're just going to save it as our file name _N and click Save. And then we're going to want to copy that file over to our import folder. Alright, now let's hop back to City Skylines. Select the prop, click Continue. We'll choose Parks. Scroll down to Sandbox. And now we want to select the model that we just created. And click Continue. Now you can see we have our wood texture here, we have our corrugated roofing material here. If we go back so we can get some of that highlight, you can see now there's some detail in the highlight. It just doesn't look like a flat object. We've actually created some peaks and valleys in our object there. So again, creating a bump map doesn't change the geometry of an object. It just tells the system where your peaks and valleys are, where your high spots and low spots are, so that it generates the shadows based off of that. So it's a little bit more efficient for the game to display your asset. And that's it. Our lean-to is now created. We've applied a custom UVW map. We've performed all of our tweaks in 3ds Max. We've applied a bump map, a normal map, to the object to give us some detail on the roofing. So it's ready to be saved and exported and shared on the workshop. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and it helps you in some way while you're creating your assets for City Skylines. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and it helps you out with creating your assets for City Skylines. If you have any questions or comments or any feedback, feel free to leave them in the comments below.